Every government in history has whispered the same comforting lie. Your money is safe, our economy is stable, everything's under control. But what if I told you that behind this calm voice lies one of the greatest financial illusions ever created, a trick so smooth, so complex, that even top economists sometimes fail to see it for what it really is. Because the United States doesn't just print money. No, it performs a financial magic act, one that fuses debt and money creation into a single breathtaking illusion. And here's the kicker: America buys its own debt. Now, most people imagine government borrowing in simple terms. The US issues bonds, China, pension funds, and big banks buy them. America gets cash, pays interest, and the system ticks along. Sounds reasonable, right? Except that's not what's really happening. Beneath this clean, logical surface lies something far more circular, a self-reinforcing loop that defies common sense. Because hidden inside the Federal Reserve's balance sheet is a maneuver that, if done by a private citizen, would probably land them in jail. The US government is lending money to itself. Here's how the trick works. When Congress spends more than it earns through taxes, the Treasury issues bonds, basically IOUs. Investors are supposed to buy them, giving the government the money it needs. But what happens when no one wants to buy those IOUs? When confidence is low or the economy is on edge, that's when the magician steps in, the Federal Reserve. The Fed, though independent, works hand in hand with the Treasury. It doesn't collect money from taxpayers or investors. It simply creates it, with a few keystrokes. And then it uses this freshly minted money to buy those Treasury bonds. They call it quantitative easing. But in plain English, it means this: the government borrows from itself, with money that didn't exist yesterday. This creates what economists call the self-funding loop. The Treasury says, "I need $1 billion." The Fed replies, "Here's $1 billion," and poof, the money appears out of thin air. On paper, the Treasury has new funds to spend. The Fed now holds a bond as an asset, a promise from its own government. It's like writing yourself a check and pretending you just got richer. Except this isn't one person doing it, it's an entire nation. And this illusion, this recursive cycle, has been powering the global economy for decades. It fuels growth, stabilizes markets, and props up confidence, but it also blurs the line between real productivity and pure financial engineering. This isn't some fringe economic theory. It's official policy, baked into the daily operations of the modern financial system. And the proof? It's hiding in plain sight. Go look at the Federal Reserve's own balance sheet. Trillions of dollars in US government securities sit right there, open to the public, line by line. But here's what few people realize. Many of those securities weren't bought from private investors or through open competition. They were bought with money that didn't exist until the Federal Reserve decided to type it into existence. What looks like a routine financial operation is actually the most advanced form of money printing humanity has ever seen. A controlled explosion of currency creation disguised under polite terms like liquidity management and market stabilization. And the scale of this operation, it's staggering. During the 2008 financial crisis, the Fed's balance sheet ballooned from under $1 trillion to over $4 trillion. Trillions were poured into government bonds, corporate debt, even mortgage-backed securities. Then came COVID. Once again, the same playbook. By 2022, that number had soared close to $9 trillion. Each time they said it was temporary. Each time it became the new normal. And every single round unleashed the same pattern. A tidal wave of newly created money chasing the same limited pool of goods, services, and assets. What began as an emergency measure has now become the default setting of modern economics. Today, this bond trick isn't just a crisis tool. It is the engine of the state. When Washington spends on defense, welfare, or infrastructure, it no longer waits for tax revenues to catch up. It simply issues bonds, knowing that if the private market won't buy them, the Fed eventually will. And that's how the loop feeds itself. Government spends, needs money, issues bonds, Fed buys bonds with new money, government spends again, round and round. It feels stable, even prosperous. Markets rally, liquidity flows, growth looks endless. But beneath the surface, it's a fragile illusion, one held together not by productivity or savings, but by the constant expansion of debt. Here's where the real genius, your deception, comes in. On paper, the Federal Reserve is independent. Legally, it can't buy bonds directly from the Treasury. So what does it do? It buys them from banks and financial institutions after those institutions buy them from the Treasury. That middle step, that bureaucratic dance, creates the illusion of legitimacy. It looks like free market activity, a voluntary exchange. But peel back the layers and the truth is simpler. One arm of the government is lending to another, using money it just conjured. It's not a conspiracy. It's institutional theater. A ritual performance designed to maintain confidence. Because if that confidence breaks, the entire illusion collapses. And here's the part most people never think about. The psychological shift this creates. For everyone else, households, businesses, even banks, spending is limited by earning. You have to make money before you can spend it. You have to save before you can invest. That's the discipline of scarcity, the foundation of real economics. But the sovereign state? It plays by different rules. It doesn't need to earn before it spends. It just issues debt, which is instantly transformed into new money by the Fed. That breaks the sacred link between effort and entitlement, between production and consumption. It's a self-referential loop, a system that feeds on its own promises. And while it can sustain prosperity in the short run, it quietly corrodes the foundation of trust on which money itself depends. The impact of this mechanism spreads like ripples through every layer of the economy. When the Federal Reserve creates money to buy government bonds, that cash doesn't just sit in a vault somewhere. It enters the banking system as new reserves, the raw material for more credit. And through the magic of fractional reserve banking, commercial banks multiply that base money into far more loans. Mortgages, business financing, credit cards, speculative bets. What begins as a simple digital entry on the Fed's balance sheet quickly becomes new homes, new debt, and new bubbles across the nation. But this multiplication isn't neutral, because the first hands that touch the new money, the big banks, corporations, hedge funds, they get the benefits before the rest of the economy even notices what happened. By the time the money trickles down to ordinary people, prices have already risen, assets have already inflated, and wages? They've barely moved. This is why the same policy that rescues Wall Street often strangles Main Street. Real wages have stagnated, but the stock market keeps hitting record highs. Housing has turned from a dream into a luxury. And speculative bubbles keep forming. Crypto, tech, real estate, only to burst again and again. This isn't a side effect. It's the design. Because when money is created at the top, it lifts asset prices, not paychecks. It rewards ownership, not labor. The bond trick doesn't just keep the economy afloat. It redistributes wealth, from savers to borrowers, from workers to investors, from the future to the present. Defenders of this system will tell you it's necessary. They'll say that in a globalized world, governments need flexibility to create money when crises strike, to prevent deflation, stimulate growth, and stabilize the system. Modern monetary theory even argues that a country issuing its own currency can never run out of money, as long as inflation stays tame. And sure, that sounds reasonable, until you realize the entire system depends on one fragile thing: belief. Belief that government debt is safe. Belief that money will still buy tomorrow what it buys today. Belief that the cycle of printing and borrowing can go on forever. But history has shown us what happens when that belief cracks. Rome, Weimar Germany, Zimbabwe. Every empire that abused its currency thought it was different, until one day their money wasn't money anymore. You can see the cracks already. The middle class, once the backbone of the economy, now watches their savings lose value while the wealthy multiply theirs through assets. Young people can't buy homes their parents afforded on a single income. Retirees living on fixed pensions find that their lifelong savings now buy less each year. This isn't bad luck. It's the direct consequence of a system that trades long-term integrity for short-term convenience. The dollar, once a neutral tool of exchange, has become a political weapon. Its value shaped not by productivity, but by policy. And the consequences don't stop at America's borders. For decades, the rest of the world played along, holding trillions in US debt because they had to. The dollar wasn't just America's currency. It was the world's. Nations used it to trade oil, settle imports, and back their own reserves. This dollar hegemony gave the US a superpower unlike any other. The ability to print the world's reserve currency and have the world accept it. But that dominance is no longer guaranteed. China is pushing to internationalize the yuan. Russia is cutting its exposure to the dollar. The BRICS nations are quietly experimenting with their own settlement systems, not out of rebellion, but out of realism. Because they've all realized one uncomfortable truth. A global system where one nation can create infinite money to fund itself isn't sustainable. It's leverage waiting to be lost. If global faith in the dollar ever fractures, if nations no longer want to hold America's debt, the very trick that built US prosperity could become the trigger for its downfall. The mechanism that once kept the empire alive could turn into its Achilles heel. The illusion only works as long as everyone believes in it. And belief is the rarest currency of all. Here's the uncomfortable truth. The math behind the bond mechanism contains a hidden paradox. Every Treasury bond purchased with newly created money does two things at once. It increases the government's debt, and it increases the money in circulation. At first glance, it seems harmless. But in reality, each new wave of money erodes the value of the currency already in use, while the debt keeps growing. It's a self-reinforcing spiral, a loop that accelerates over time. To maintain low interest rates and avoid market panic, the Federal Reserve must create more money to buy more bonds. And each act of creation diminishes the purchasing power of the money already out there. It's a race that can only end one way. At some point, the illusion starts to fray. Look at COVID-19. Congress passed multi-trillion-dollar stimulus packages. The Treasury issued a matching volume of bonds. The Fed instantly created the digital dollars to buy them, all within weeks, faster than private investors could react. What used to be months of negotiation and market discipline became a closed-loop operation, the government financing itself through its own balance sheet. In mathematical terms, it's exponential. In political terms, it's a suspension of fiscal reality. And the consequences aren't just economic. They're political. In classical democracies, taxes create discipline. Citizens pay for public spending. Politicians are accountable. But when governments can spend by conjuring money instead of raising taxes, that discipline disappears. Politicians can promise anything, welfare programs, subsidies, defense spending, knowing that the Fed will cover the shortfall. The public sees the benefits today, while the cost, inflation, slowly eats away purchasing power over time. Immediate gratification replaces long-term responsibility. The link between effort and reward, between earning and spending, begins to vanish. Fiscal prudence becomes politically toxic, while collective delusion, the belief that money is infinite, takes hold. At its core, the bond mechanism is a financial magic act. The Treasury writes promises to itself in the form of bonds. The Fed transforms those promises into spendable dollars. The public, watching only the final act, believes this is normal economic activity. It's a trick based entirely on belief. One hand distracts the audience with technical jargon, while the other quietly deposits checks into the government's own account. But every illusion has a limit. As the system scales, skepticism grows. Inflation rises. Foreign buyers hesitate. Political deadlock appears. When confidence falters, the consequences ripple through every paycheck, every savings account, every household. Understanding this system isn't just about economics. It's about power, control, and trust. Your savings, your wages, your future purchasing power, they're shaped not only by markets, but by a mechanism most people never see. The bond trick is a redistributive architecture, quietly shifting wealth across classes, generations, and nations, all under the guise of stability. Modern money isn't just a medium of exchange. It's a reflection of belief, authority, and control. And when that belief finally wavers, the reckoning will not be merely economic. It will shake the very foundations of society.